In this video, we will discuss the summary of a famous play named Candida by George Bernard Shaw. Before going deep into the text, let us just discuss about the characters. First of all, Candida. Candida is our 33-year-old protagonist of this text. Next character is James Mavor Morrell. James Mavor Morrell is the husband of Candida. He is a renowned clergyman famous for his preaching. Next character is Eugene Marchbanks. Eugene Marchbanks is a poet of 18 years of old. He thinks that he is deeply in love with Candida. Next character, Miss Proserpine Garnet, or shortly Miss Prosy. She is the secretary of Mr. Morrell. She is about 30 years of old and has a sharp tongue. She is in love with Mr. Morrell. Next character is Alexander Lexie Meal. Alexander Lexie Meal, or shortly Lexie Meal, is the curate of Mr. Morrell. He is a conceited and immature novice. Finally, Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess is Candida's father, as well as Mr. Morrell's father-in-law. Candida is a three-act play by Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw in 1894. This comedy drama explores themes of love, marriage, gender roles, and social conventions in late Victorian society. The play revolves around the character of Candida, a woman whose charm and intelligence captivate the hearts of two very different kinds of men: her husband Reverend James Morrell and a young poet named Eugene Marchbanks. The play is a serious comedy. It is a domestic play having common aspects of day-to-day life. As I said that the play is divided into three acts. It starts in the morning and ends at night. Three acts are set in three different time phases: morning, afternoon, and night. The play opens in a fine October morning in the Victorian-era London suburbs. The play is set in the parlour of Mr. Morrell's home in London. Initially, it becomes clear that Mr. Morrell is a highly busy man who frequently lectures when Mr. Morrell and Miss Proserpine try to locate a day in his calendar for him to deliver a lecture. The curate for Mr. Morrell, the Reverend Alexander Meal, also known as Lexie, shows up late for work. He was amazed to hear that Candida, Mr. Morrell's wife, along with the children, is getting back early from their vacation. Candida's father, Mr. Burgess, shows up to see Mr. Morrell. So, Proserpine and Lexie went out. It's been 3 years since Burgess last visited Mr. Morrell. They get into an old fight about how Mr. Burgess was denied a big contract because his own son-in-law James Morrell had criticized him for giving his workers abysmal salaries. After some time, when Candida arrived, they had just settled their argument. The young poet Eugene Marchbanks is with her. Marchbanks is a shy man who has trouble interacting with others and experiences anxiety when tipping cab drivers. One day, Mr. Morrell rescued him while he was sleeping in outdoors. He is an earl's nephew. After some time, when Candida is busy inspecting the house and Mr. Burgess is gone, Marchbanks stammeringly told Mr. Morrell that he is deeply in love with his wife. Mr. Morrell firstly mocked this remark of Marchbanks by referring that it is a case of calf love. However, this conversation turned into a heated argument. Marchbanks remarks that instead of reality, truth, and freedom, which Candida longs for, she has only gotten mere sermons and rhetoric. Hearing all this, Mr. Morrell tells Marchbanks to get out of his house, but he stays, as Candida requests him to stay to attend the lunch. Here, the Act 1 ends. Act 2 starts in the afternoon when Marchbanks tries to trick Mr. Morrell's secretary, Miss Proserpine, to spit out that she is in love with Mr. Morrell. Although he knows that Miss Proserpine has a soft corner for Mr. Morel, he asks her if a woman can fall in love with such a man like Mr. Morel. Mr. Morel has just cancelled his scheduled speech, which was so unlikely. In fact, it's the first time anyone can recall him postponing an event. To which he answers that it's just that he just doesn't want to go today. He says he also needs one night with his wife and friends. Mr. Morel reportedly cancelled his presentation to keep a watchful eye on Marchbanks and Candida. But he changes his mind once again, and Morel decides to deliver his lecture while leaving Candida and Marchbanks at home alone to put their love for one another to the test. This act adds some more complexity to this love triangle. Act 3 starts with Marchbanks' reciting of poems for Candida, to which she doesn't pay her attention to. He has not yet expressed his feelings to Candida. After some time, Mr. Morel returns and watches them over for a moment. Finally, at the end, Candida notices Mr. Morel in anguish, so she restrains Mr. Marchbanks not to disturb him. At some point, Candida is informed about all the matter of the day. She finds herself in a kind of dilemma. But between Mr. Morel and Marchbanks, she wisely chooses Mr. Morel. Candida tells Marchbanks that for Mr. Morel, she is not only his wife, but also his mother, his 3 sisters, as well as the mother of his children. And the whole matter is that Mr. Morel needs her. So she chooses Mr. Morel. It's quite dramatic as Candida says Mr. Morel needs her. And Mr. Morel also said in the earlier section that if Candida chooses Marchbanks, there will be no one to take care of her. In this way, Marchbanks got rejected, and when he was leaving, Candida stopped him and gave him an amazing advice. She requested him to write a poetry on what she will tell him now. She only gave him 2 sentences, which are like this: when I'm 30, she will be 45. When I'm 60, she will be 75. And she requested him to recall these lines whenever he remembers her. And the play ends here. Point to be noted here that, unlike Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House, where the wife Nora Helmer is shown as the child of her husband Torvald Helmer, in Candida we see that Candida, the wife, considers her husband Mr. Morel as her child. Yes, George Bernard Shaw wrote Candida as a response to A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen. Shaw wrote that Candida is a counterpoint to A Doll's House, and that in a real doll's house, the man is the doll. In Candida, Shaw presented a different scenario of women and brought the criticism into much higher space. The main theme of Candida is feminism, in particular, the free choice that women should have to decide if they want to be housewives, wives, and mothers, or if they want to have another kind of life. In A Doll's House, Ibsen's vision of Nora Helmer as the doll in the house of her husband Torvald Helmer led to Shaw's presentation of Mr. Morel as the doll in Candida's house.